Have you ever wondered who first tried to classify all of life on Earth, or who invented the rules of logic we still use today? Chances are you're thinking of one man, Aristotle. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to unpack the incredible life, work, and lasting impact of one of the most influential thinkers in all of human history. Aristotle was born way back in 384 BCE in a small town in northern Greece called Stagira. This location is more important than it sounds. His father, Nicomatus, was the personal physician to the king of Macedonia. Growing up in a medical household wasn't just a fun fact. It completely shaped Aristotle's worldview. While other philosophers were lost in abstract thought, Aristotle was raised around the practice of observation, diagnosis, and tangible evidence. He learned to look at the world, study it closely, and draw conclusions based on what he could see and touch. This empirical, almost scientific mindset would become his trademark. When he was about 17, Aristotle packed his bags and moved to the intellectual capital of the ancient world, Athens. For the next 20 years, he was a student and then a colleague of Plato, the superstar philosopher of the era. Now, it's easy to imagine this as a simple master and apprentice story, but that's not quite right. Aristotle deeply respected Plato, but he was no mere follower. He was a fierce debater and an independent thinker. While Plato famously argued that the real world was a realm of perfect, unchanging forms, or ideas that we can only access through reason, Aristotle pushed back. He argued that reality is the world we experience right here, right now, through our senses. This fundamental disagreement between focusing on the abstract and focusing on the tangible would define their philosophical legacies. After Plato died in 347 BCE, Aristotle left Athens. He wasn't chosen to lead the academy, perhaps because of his differing views. This departure, however, kicked off one of the most productive periods of his life. He spent over a decade traveling throughout the Greek islands and Asia Minor, particularly on the island of Lesbos. This wasn't a vacation. This was a massive research expedition. He dedicated himself to studying the natural world with an unmatched intensity. He dissected marine animals, documented their anatomy, and observed their behaviors. He studied plant life, meteorology, and geology. It was during this time that he laid the groundwork for the field of biology, creating detailed classifications of hundreds of species. He was essentially a one-man research institute, cataloging the world around him with meticulous care. Around 343 BCE, his life took another interesting turn. He received a royal invitation from King Philip II of Macedonia to come and tutor his teenage son. That son's name was Alexander, soon to be known as Alexander the Great. Now, let's be clear about this relationship. It's tempting to think that Aristotle, the great moral philosopher, shaped Alexander into a wise and just ruler. But the evidence doesn't really support that. Alexander was always destined to be a conqueror. What Aristotle likely provided was a foundational Greek education in science, politics, and literature. He gave Alexander the tools of Greek culture and a respect for knowledge, which might explain why Alexander later sent biological specimens from his conquests back to Greece for study. It was a partnership of giants, but not the moral fairy tale we sometimes imagine. After his tutoring duties were done and Alexander began his world-conquering campaign, Aristotle returned to Athens in 335 BCE. This time, he wasn't just a student, he was a master. He founded his own school, the Lyceum. But the Lyceum was more than just a school. It was a revolution in learning. It was arguably the world's first true research university. It had lecture halls, a vast library of scrolls, and dedicated spaces for collaborative study. Aristotle and his students, known as the Peripatetics, because they often walked around while discussing ideas, investigated everything, and I mean everything. This is where Aristotle's genius for categorization truly exploded. He wasn't just having random thoughts, he was creating entire systems of knowledge. He invented formal logic, giving us concepts like the syllogism that formed the basis of Western reasoning for 2,000 years. In biology, he created a ladder of life, classifying organisms from simple plants up to humans. In ethics, he developed the idea of the golden mean, arguing that virtue lies in finding a balance between extremes. For example, courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. In politics, he analyzed different forms of government monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy and their potential corruptions. He wrote about physics, metaphysics, poetry, and rhetoric. His goal was colossal: to understand and organize all of human knowledge. He was a walking encyclopedia, a human search engine for the ancient world. But his life in Athens, which had been so successful, came to a sudden and dangerous end. In 323 BCE, his former student, Alexander the Great, died unexpectedly in Babylon. In the power vacuum that followed, a wave of anti-Macedonian sentiment swept through Athens. Aristotle, with his deep connections to the Macedonian court, became an easy target. A charge of impiety, the same charge that had led to the execution of Socrates 76 years earlier, was brought against him. Aristotle was a pragmatist. Seeing the writing on the wall, he decided to flee the city. He famously said he would not allow Athens to sin against philosophy twice. He was referring, of course, to the state-sanctioned killing of his philosophical predecessor, Socrates. He understood that a political mob was not interested in a logical debate. Aristotle retreated to his mother's family estate on the island of Euboea. His exile wouldn't last long. However, he died just a year later, in 322 BCE, most likely from a digestive illness. He was 62 years old. So what is his legacy? It's almost impossible to overstate. After his death, his works were lost to the West for centuries, but were preserved and studied intensely by Islamic scholars, who knew him as the first teacher. When his writings were reintroduced to Europe during the Middle Ages, they caused a complete intellectual revolution. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, shaping Western thought for centuries. His biological work remained the authority until the 19th century, and his logic was the standard until the development of modern symbolic logic. Today, even if you've never read a word he wrote, you are living in a world shaped by Aristotle. Every time you make a logical argument, classify a set of objects, or talk about finding a healthy balance in your life, you are echoing his ideas. He taught us that the world is knowable, and that through careful observation and rigorous reason, we can begin to understand it. He wasn't just a philosopher who lived in the clouds. He was a thinker who got his hands dirty, who looked at the real world and tried to make sense of it all. And for that, he remains one of the most important figures to have ever lived. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this dive into Aristotle's life interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest minds. See you in the next video.
Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Courage is the first of human qualities because it guarantees the others. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. The sign of thorough knowledge is the ability to teach. What is a friend? A single soul dwelling in two bodies. Anybody can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree, that is not easy. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet.
But Aristotle still crying because nobody likes the video and subscribe the channel.
Whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Happiness depends upon ourselves. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. He who has overcome his fears will truly be free. Quality is not an act, it is a habit.
Thanks for watching. Like and share the video, and must subscribe the channel for my support and motivation.